Hi class. Today I'm going to try and give you a wee run through of the lesson that we would have been doing in class today by video, and hopefully it'll make enough sense for you to be able to give this a wee go at home. In terms of what you'll need to do, you'll need a pencil and you'll need to make sure that you've sharpened the point of it. You'll need some paper, ideally A4, and in an ideal world, paper from a sketch pad. But don't worry too much if you don't, just any printer paper. Even if you have lined paper, or coloured paper, if that's all you have, that's fine, you can use that too. Likewise with your pencil, if you have not got a normal pencil, you could use coloured pencils, but they don't tend to work as easily. So, assuming you've got everything you need, what we're going to do today is learn about how to, it's a skill that we use for what we call rendering. So rendering is this idea of adding a kind of tone or colour or texture to an illustration to make it look realistic. So that's kind of the big difference between something that's rendered and coloured in. With colouring in, we're just really putting a colour across it. Whereas with rendering, what we're trying to do is add, for example, light and shade to give a sense of realism. So to give you a couple of examples why that's important, we've just sketched out some basic shapes here. We've got a cuboid, cylinder and a cone. Now if we just drew these and coloured them in all one colour, we wouldn't get the same three-dimensional effect because there'd be no simulation of what we realistically see when we look at objects, which is light and shade. And that's why it's important for us to understand or to be able to control tone when we use a pencil, so that we can go from our darkest tone or value through to our lightest, and that we can also use a gradient. Because while we might need a scale, i.e. just individual tonal values for flat sides, like on a cuboid, where you will tend to find that each side is just a single tonal value, where we have a curved surface, the amount of shadow increases slowly and in a kind of a smooth way as we go around to the darkest side of the object if the light's coming from over here. So to simulate that, a scale isn't really much use. We actually need to use a gradient. Now, unfortunately, because I don't have a visualizer to hand, I'm going to have to record this all while holding the camera in my left hand and just using one hand to do it. So it's not going to be quite ideal, and I'll do the best I can to illustrate a couple of the key points to help you out. Now, first thing to remember, there are a couple of rules that we always want to stick with here. First is that we use a sharp pencil. The reason we want a sharp pencil is that we want, if I can get my camera to focus, we want to have a reasonably long amount of lead that we can actually use in our pencil. We don't want it to be a little short kind of nub, because we want to actually use the side of the lead. So the longer the lead is kind of sticking out, the easier that's going to be. And the second point is to get a kind of smooth, even tone, rather than putting our pencil down like this. I'll grab another bit of paper to illustrate this. If we put our pencil tip down, we get a thin line. And so the idea for us is to try and get smooth tone, which is to say we don't want it to be like this, where we've got lots of light parts in it. We want it to be nice and smooth so that each of these lines overlap. Now, if you use your pencil with a really thin line, it's really difficult to get all of those lines completely overlap, leaving no white areas. So what we do is we tilt our pen over kind of on its side. I find it easier to hold it like this, but you find whatever's comfortable for you. And instead of using the point, as you'll see what happens as I bring the pencil over, it changes from being a nice thin line, or not so nice thin line, to being a nice kind of thick line here. And the difference is that when I go back and forth, what I'm trying to do is make sure that every line overlaps so we don't leave any white bits. When I put it on its side, it's much easier to do that because the lines are so much thicker that it's easier for me to travel along and have no gaps than it is when I do it with the tip of the pencil. So that's why we change our grip, so that we get a much smoother, more even tone. So the angle that we hold the pencil at is important, and overlapping each of the pencil strokes is important. That's why when we do rendering, it's really important to not just have the pencil at the right angle, but to not move it too quickly. Because even if I have it at the correct angle, if I move it too quickly, I'm still going to leave these kind of white spots in between. And that means that I've got to come back over, and it ends up looking a lot messier and kind of more chaotic and inconsistent than we really want it to, or we want it to look like this, nice and smooth. So that's the idea. We want to make sure that we're going side to side and we're moving our pencil this way, like in this direction, slowly, but side to side, we want to be going quite fast. Okay, so we're going fast side to side so that the lines overlap each other and along the way slowly. Because if you go the alternative, if you go slowly side to side and fast along the way, you end up with that, which is really no use to us. So those are some of the basic principles. The last one is just your pencil pressure. So it's worth getting a bit of spare paper and having a wee practice just like I'm doing here before you actually start this. And start by going from the lightest tone that you can. So basically almost just take all the weight off the pencil. So it's really just the weight of the pencil itself touching the paper. And then slowly build up pressure. So just grip the pencil a little bit tighter. Start putting a bit more of your weight onto the tip of the pencil. And just keep going. See how dark you can go. So you keep going. And as you're trying to get darker, you might want to make sure that you're overlapping the lines even more to build up more tone. So that you go from a really faint tone to a really dark tone, okay? So as you go along, we're kind of adjusting the pressure and how tightly we're holding the pencil, how hard we're pressing it down the page. So in terms of how to do the task, what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to sketch out 4 rectangular boxes, long thin ones like this. So we've got 2 we're going to do a value scale and 2 we're going to do a value gradient. I'm not going to get too bogged down in the difference between the terms tone and value, but you'll hear people use both of these terms, so I've just put them both down. And if you have a ruler, it's fine, you can use a ruler to do it, but if you don't, you can just sketch them out as best you can freehand. You want to try and make sure that you've got 5 roughly evenly sized boxes here. And in this bottom one here, we just want an empty rectangle. Our starting point to make this as simple as possible is usually to start with your darkest one first. Because if you start in the middle, it can be quite tricky to kind of guess, where middle is because you don't have a reference point for how dark and how light your pencil can go. So I'm not going to be able to do this as well as I normally would, but what I'm trying to do here is just kind of keep nice firm pressure on the pencil. It's kind of hard to do because the paper keeps moving about because I can't hold it with my other hand. So we're trying to get nice dark tone, the darkest we can get here without actually tearing through the paper. Normally I would try and work up to the edges that way, but it's a little bit easier to just do it this way while I'm going one-handed. Now it's not going to be super neat, I'm just going to do this quickly, just to give you an idea of the tones rather than worrying about getting the box perfectly neatly filled in at the edges. So we could go back the other way, but we've basically got that about as dark as we can in that box. And then I would move to the other end here and do your lightest tone. So loosen up your hand if you've just been doing it really dark so that you're not gripping your pencil tight anymore. And really light pressure. So we want to be going back and forth as lightly as we can so that we're building up a tone that's only just visible. This is the lightest tone that we can add. Okay, we don't really want to go over it any more than necessary unless it's uneven. Mine's not perfect, but I'll do for demonstration. So I've now got my darkest and my lightest points, and it's easier now to kind of estimate what's in the middle of that. So for my middle, I want to get something that's darker than the lightest tone and lighter than the darkest tone. Now I would start light and build up, because you can always make it darker quite easily, but it's quite difficult to make it lighter again. So I just kind of slowly work on building that up a little bit at a time until you're happy with the tone. Again, not ideal doing it one-handed. Normally you've got your other hand free to keep moving your page around, but we'll just see how we go. So we go for something kind of like that. Again, trying to minimise any kind of white gappy bits, try and keep it all as even as we can. I'm not going to spend forever on making it perfect though, because it's just for a quick demonstration. So we've now got our darkest, our lightest and our medium, and we just need to kind of fill in the spaces now. So this bit here has got to be darker than the medium one, but not as dark as the darkest one. You get the idea, okay? So I'll just kind of go most of the way through doing this one, and then I'll leave it at that, because I think I've made the point fairly clearly. I don't think I need to go through every single one of the boxes perfectly. So we keep working on this, build it up darker and darker as we need to until we get to the right sort of tone. Probably about there, we're getting in the right ballpark, because it's not quite as dark as that, but a bit darker than that. Now, you do that for your other box here, so you've got another in between, and that's you basically done your value scale. And I've asked you to do 2, so that you can practice basically. You can have a go at it, and if the first one doesn't quite work out right, maybe you make them all a bit too dark or a bit too light, you can have another go at improving it in your second one. Same with the value gradient, but the difference here is that because we don't have the boxes, what we want to try and do is get a smooth transition from light to dark, dark to light. Again, for me, I personally find it easiest to try and start at the lightest end. So start with my lightest tone, and don't worry too much if you run out the edges of the the paper. There are ways around that we can learn later on, but we'll just focus on the tone just now. So I'd find it easiest to start with the lightest tone. And all we're doing is the same as before with the scale, but we're just going all the way along. So we need to kind of move our arm or our pencil or our page as we're doing this, and we work our way along. Now, I'm just starting with my lightest tone here pretty much the whole way along. And what I'll do afterwards is then start building that up, going back from dark to light. So at this point here, I'm going to add a bit more tone in here, darken it down, keep coming back along, maybe not go all the way to the end though. And we just keep working on that, a bit darker at a time, another layer at a time, try and smooth out any uneven areas. It's kind of difficult to do this looking through the camera at the same time, but hopefully it gives you the idea. And you can see that it's starting to form that kind of gradient from dark to light. We just need to kind of build up layer by layer until we get it to where we want it to be, till we're happy that we've got a nice kind of darkest end is about as dark as the darkest end in our scale, and likewise the lightest end. You can spend time obviously afterwards coming up to the edges and just kind of trying to tidy up, but I wouldn't worry too much about that just now. What I'm most concerned about is getting the gradient from darkest to lightest. As a demonstration, I haven't gone into as much depth or spent as much time on it as I could to make it perfect, because I think the important point is just showing you the principles, and I don't want to make this video take too long. But just to recap the key points, make sure that you've got a sharp pencil to begin with. Keep it at a low angle, so instead of your pencil being at a point like you would for writing, you're going to have it held low down so you're getting that thick line. Make sure each of your strokes of your pencil going back and forth overlaps the last one, so that's why we need to move along this way slowly, side to side quickly. And we want to make sure that we adjust our pressure by adjusting how firmly we grip the pencil, how hard we press it down onto the page, and that will allow us to control how dark a line we are leaving as we do it. When you've done this, all I'm looking for you to do is take a wee snap of it and turn it in on Classroom, so you can use your mobile phone. Just take a pic like I'm kind of doing here, and go onto the Classroom app if you have it on your phone. Go to the Add or Create button in the assignment, and then you should be able to upload a file from your device, which would just be from your camera. Alternatively, if you take it on your phone, you could upload it to Google Drive if you've got the app for that, and then you can attach it from Drive. You could even, if you want to, on your Chromebook, use the webcam to take a picture. So, you know, that's really up to yourself. You may find that the camera picture quality is not brilliant on that. But do please make sure that you've got it well lit. So make sure you've got a lamp or something, or that you're beside a nice big window like that, because otherwise, if it's really dark, it's hard for me to see. If you really wanted to, if you're quite enjoying it, you could try sketching out some 3D shapes and applying your tones to those as a wee extension task, but I'll leave that up to you. Any questions, just get back to me and I'll do the best I can to help.